Are there questions that religion can answer that science can't? Are there questions that science can answer that religion can't? Some people think that science and religion offer competing explanations of the world, so they both can't be right at the same time. So once upon a time, people believed that lightning was made by gods like Baal or Thor, who were angry and would throw their lightning bolts at the ground, maybe aiming at some stray mortal who had offended them. But nowadays we know about electrical discharge and how that forms in clouds, so we don't need to explain lightning by invoking Baal or Thor anymore. Science explains the gods away. The more we know about science, the less we need the gods. So the argument goes, as science advances, religion retreats. But that will not work as a terribly good objection against all religious belief. Just because we know that God made the world, that doesn't mean we know how God made everything in the world. And it doesn't tell us how the world works. In fact, the first scientists believed that if God made the world, he would have had a plan. If God designed our minds, then we should be able to comprehend that plan. So, for example, if we use math to design things, as engineers were beginning to do, and if we're made in God's image, so we're like God in some ways, then maybe we can use mathematics to understand the world. If we make devices with mechanisms in them, like clocks, then maybe when we examine the world, we'll find that God has put mechanisms in the world similar to the things that we create. So the first scientists believed that, yes, God made the world, but we don't know what he's made until we go and examine it. In fact, because God is free, God can make whatever world he wants. So we have to get out of our armchairs and observe the world to find out what God has done. What's more, because we are sinful creatures with limited minds, we've got to check our ideas by doing experiments and taking careful measurements and checking one another's working out. Before the scientific revolution, a lot of folks thought that we could never really understand the world because we weren't smart enough for it, because the world was too chaotic. Or like the ancient Greek philosophers, they believed we were so smart we could figure out what the world was like just by thinking about it, by doing philosophy in our armchairs, and without any testing or measurements. It took some very finely tuned beliefs about the world, that it was created by a rational God who was similar to us in some ways in the way he would go about making things, and also that God had designed our minds so our minds could understand the world that we were in, but that also we're limited. We're smart, but we're not as smart as God. So we've got to go and examine the world and do some checking out and some experimentation and make some measurements to get us thinking scientifically. You also have to remember, we know that science can produce marvellous inventions, but the first scientists didn't know that. And it actually took some centuries for science to transform the world. So why bother investigating the world if there's not going to be any practical benefits? Well, the first scientists were motivated because it was God's world, and it was valuable to know about the world. God played an important part in their systems of thought. Like Galileo and Kepler, the first scientists believed science was important because it would enable us to think God's thoughts after him. Still, there are some questions religion can't answer. Just how does nature work? What are the laws of nature? But there are also some limits to what science can teach us. So here are 4 questions science cannot answer. Why? Our universe could have been chaotic. Instead, it is so ordered we can actually use mathematics to describe it. Science describes a universe that consists of particles that follow very particular scientific laws. What science can't do is explain why there's a universe to describe in the first place. And it can't explain why that universe is so well ordered we can describe it. Secondly, so what? Eventually this universe will collapse into a fireball or become dark, cold, and lifeless. Eventually all the stars will die. If we, our species, and the beauty of this universe are all destined for oblivion, and if no trace of conscious memory will remain, our lives don't seem to have the meaning that we want. Why should we care about anything if this universe is all there is and this universe is doomed to die? Not one single scientific theory can give us an answer. 3. Says who? Scientists like psychologists or anthropologists might explain why we have moral feelings, why we feel guilt or feel compassion. But do those feelings tell us anything about reality? Or do our feelings mislead us? Science can't tell us if there really are moral rules about right and wrong, good and evil. True moral rules wouldn't change according to what we believe or feel, and they wouldn't be composed of particles, and the laws of nature couldn't describe them. If this universe is all there is, science can't tell us the right thing to do. It can't even tell us if there is a right thing to do. Fourthly, why me? Am I significant? Am I important? Do I have a purpose? How should I live? What should I want out of life? Science cannot answer those questions.